Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. This is Kevin Graham. We're going old school. It's a Friday afternoon, Kev, and this was the first lineup 7 years ago on A Celtic State of Mind. Can you remember what the whole process was and what our idea was? What did we want to achieve when we launched A Celtic State of Mind? What was it?
World domination. No, it wasn't that. The whole idea
was just a byproduct, mate.
That was just a byproduct. The whole idea was you phoned me about a week and a half before. First time we had ever spoke, even though we had been in a number of rooms together at the exact same time, which was quite bizarre. And I must admit, I did speak to you at the Tommy Gemmell dance because you gave us some stuff for the raffle, and that was the first time I met you. But I didn't put two and two together at the time. So he phoned me a week and a half later, the day Scotland played England, Lee Griffiths' greatest moment on a football field. Mm-hmm. We recorded the first one in the morning, and I basically says to you, I do not want to just be a normal football podcast talking about the games. I want to talk about the politics of Celtic. I want to interview interesting people. I am not interested about who's playing left back. I'm more interested about the culture of Celtic rather than the culture where the football team takes the support. That's what I was more interested in. And I think we've done that. Obviously, Absolutely. The pandemic got in the way and we've become what we've actually become. I mean, it's absolutely great, but we never planned a pandemic. We never planned a daily bulletin. We never planned anything like that. So it was these. Sometimes you just need to, in the words of Mr. Gallagher, sometimes you just need to roll with it and see what actually happens.
We have diversified, there's no doubt about that, Kev, because during the pandemic, everybody wanted to speak about Celtic. There was a community formed within that period. There is no doubt about it. But the main reason we got together was to try and tap into what on earth was it that binds us all together, as well as the football. And it was this kind of state of mind idea that we had. Obviously, the terminology of state of mind has been used so many times. Most notably, I would suggest in music and in lyrics and stuff like that, Kev. You hear it all the time. The one that sprung out to me, of course, was the NY State of Mind on the Nas album, Illmatic. And in the early days, we just interviewed people who had even a passing interest in Celtic, from everyone from Paul Gallagher right through to someone like Professor Phil Scrutiny, who was the man who pushed for the public inquiry into the Hillsborough disaster. And yes,
which is one of the best interviews ever.
We need to get him back on. He was brilliant.
It's one of the best interviews ever.
He was unbelievable. Yeah. And the thing is, Kev, it was one of the old audio interviews. And I think going through some of these subjects again on film is working pretty well, because obviously we'd spoken to Phil Differ before. We'd spoken to Ken McCluskey, Jackie Mack, Simon Donnelly. These guys have been on the show before, but now we're digging in and we're doing it on camera. But the reason we're talking about it is because when you and I spoke, and I think the reason why it got a general interest to start off with was because it was kind of left field in terms of some of the subject matter that we were covering. We spoke about the potato famine. We spoke about the tricolour. We spoke about Irish rebel songs being sang historically at Celtic Park. We spoke about the Green Brigade, the rise of the ultra movement within Scottish football as well, Kev. And it's been brought back to the forefront again in a huge way. And the Celtic support has been highlighted massively again this season. And it's absolutely no surprise to me that we're being targeted by all the right people, if you're of a Celtic persuasion, I would suggest, Kev, because it is the mainstream. And I don't just mean mainstream media, just the mainstream hierarchy within this country, be that politicians, media men, the authority of Scottish football, opposing Scottish football teams. Everybody's got an opinion on Celtic as a football club and us as a fan base. And it seems to be getting heightened the more successful we become, Kev.
It is getting heightened the more successful we become. And it's always round about this time of year when we highlight the poppy fascism, and we're the only club that doesn't bend down. We're only club support that doesn't bend down and saying, no, we're no saluting big giant inflatable poppies on pitches and stuff like that. Look, I think everybody who had grandparents, it's not my age, but if you're from my generation, you had grandparents who fought in the Second World War. You maybe had a great grandparent that was involved in the First World War. And when I was growing up, going through school and all of that, that's what you went on Remembrance Day and celebrated, or you remembered those guys. Tony Blair politicised it and changed the meaning, and from that point it's become a bone of contention. And even the way it's been reported this week, saying a section in the Celtic support chanted pro IRA songs. It's Aidan McInnesby. Go and read the lyrics and you'll actually see what it was about. The song was chosen for a reason because of the message it was given, and that message actually backed up what was on the banner, and that was the reason it was given. Yes, even though we are the biggest, most successful club in this country, and we have been for the last 20 years, we are still the underdog in this country, and I love it.
Yeah.
And we are still the anti-establishment. We are still the underdog, and we've got a bit of a big running coming in now. But a lot of folk are looking at the cup final against Rangers, and I love the fact that we'll go into that cup final and all week we'll actually be painted as the underdog, and we'll be painted because 70% of this country will want us to lose that game. And I love that, and that will never change. And the fact is, they're just taking pot shots at us because we have been completely successful for the last 20 years. 24 years.
And counting.
And counting. And it's not going to change. It never changed that when Rangers won the league. Nothing changed. We will get punches. We will lose games of football because that's what happens in sport. We may even lose an occasional league title, but it's not going to change the actual swing of things.
No.
We may lose the League Cup final because that's what can happen in sport, but it's not going to change the overall narrative, the overall outcome. But we're still underdog. We're still anti-establishment because there's 70% of this country absolutely detest us.
It's one of the things, Kev, that people hear you saying that and say, "Oh, you've got a victim mentality and all this kind of stuff." I was tying it in just yesterday, talking to JP in relation to the fact that we don't get any tickets. We barely get tickets now for away games, and I have said time and time again, until someone explains to me the business sense behind it, then I will be taking it personally as a Celtic fan. I think it is the fact they don't want Celtic fans in their stadium, Kev. They would rather that a game is broadcast globally, right, with faded empty seats. And it looks terrible. It looks absolutely dreadful, you know.
You just need to go on social media, or I know fans of so-called of the smaller teams in Scottish football, and I ask them about this. And it's no business, it's bigotry. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. And they say, we didn't want you in their stadiums singing those songs. Well, you didn't need to turn up. You didn't turn up anyway. So there's no... it has changed. It has changed a bit. A lot of these clubs, I've lost sympathy for a lot of these clubs now. I have lost sympathy for a lot of these clubs who are just... They're bowing down to the bowling club mentality of a parochial, maybe 20 or 30 season ticket holders who will not move out their seats for 2 games a season.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing more damage to their club than what they actually realise.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm one of the guys that wants the whole... I want the free broom loan back, and I would let 7,000 Rangers fans in Celtic Park again because it was a spectacle. I understand what it looks like in the bigger picture, but these guys didn't understand what it's like in the bigger picture. They didn't ken. They're no bored that it looks absolutely terrible looking at Rugby Park last week.
I'm going to make a prediction though, Kev, on that, right? Because you and I have both been in the broom loan, the free broom loan, as you say, during a Glasgow derby and during an Old Firm derby. You know, I've been in there. So when you look at that scenario, you're talking about it being a spectacle. I loved it. I absolutely loved those fixtures, and I loved being an away fan in the stadium.
Worst place in the world when you got beat.
Yes.
But best place in the world when you won.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sport.
I know. I mean, I'm talking Cascarino jumping into the crowd, you know, as far back as that. But
me patting Paul Byrne on the head.
Paul,
when he scored.
Burnsy, my mate,
Aye,
Burnsy.
Aye.
By the way, I'm no name dropping. There's a story behind that I've told a few times.
Well, one of the worst ones was when Albert's done Lambert. We went. Did we go 2-0 up with Berkovic, and Berkovic scored?
Early doors, yeah.
Early doors, and that was one of the worst times I ever had at Ibrox. That was just absolutely dreadful. At that point, you knew we were sinking. Really, that was just a dreadful whole day.
Is that when Berkovic done the Chicken Tonight dance?
Aye,
he did, didn't he? He was winding up Ian right. But another one that was so disappointing was a nothing each draw when Samaras missed the penalty. In the same season of Samaras Sunday, he misses the penalty. Commons wanted to take it. You remember that, and he took it, and McGregor saved it right behind that. Horrible. But my point is this, Kev, right? The way that things are going, I agree with you in terms of the domination. It is going to continue. We are going to, you know, get galvanised time and time again. Things can happen in football. The change of manager, whenever that comes round, is always one of those moments, Kev, that I think to myself, right, that's where you're vulnerable. As a football team, your club obviously has the infrastructure, the finance behind you. But as a team, it can flip at that moment because it doesn't always work out the way you want it to work out. And we've seen a manager coming in and things not being right, etc. But whilst it's in a good rhythm as it is right now, you're looking at the situation. Things aren't going to get any better for Rangers. There's going to come a point where they need us to buy these seats again, Kev. Because at the moment, in their view, they don't, because they've sold them to season ticket holders, haven't they? But there will come a point where they would be more than happy to take 7,500 Celtic fans in their stadium. I'm going to make that prediction right now. Do you think that will come to fruition in the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, you have a look at it. When are they heading back to where they were post-war? Early 80s. Everybody remembers that. Look, I was 5 or 6 in the early 80s, but when you look at the Celtic got the Broom loan, part of the Govan stand, part of the main stand in the enclosure. And I think that stopped in about 88. We stopped getting a bit of the enclosure. I think the centenary year was the last year when they put seats in the bottom, but I think that's when it was stopped. And I hope Rangers are heading back to be that sort of non-entity, which they were in the early 80s, because growing up in the early 80s, you didn't like Rangers and you didn't like getting beat off Rangers, and Ali McCoy always seemed to score goals to put you at the League Cup, and used to lose League Cup finals. But it was Aberdeen and Dundee United that you were like, going, oh, didn't you had a they were your rivals, really, if you were challenging for the league titles. And more often than not, we were challenging for league titles while Rangers weren't. So I hope they get back to being that non-entity. I don't think they will. I think finances are completely different now. I don't tend to agree. I think they will continue selling it, just out of pure staunchism to stop us getting back in it. If staunchism's even a word.
Well, it is now. It is now, yes. We should remember the Viz used to release their own wee dictionary of made-up words. I think Acsom should be right in about that. Ella Hussey's in there as well. Kieran Allen remembers that Cascarino goal. The thought of it just put him in a bad mood. Sorry, Kieran. Tony Cascarino. What I would say about Cascarino, I think I've seen the vast majority of the games he played for Celtic, right? And I remember him scoring that first goal against Hearts at Celtic Park. He came on as a sub. The opening goal, if I remember correctly, was scored by a young Mark McNally for Celtic, right? And it was a flashing header, and everybody's looking at McNally as the new guy coming through. Always remember McNally wore Arrow boots, Kev. Arrow, remember them? Whatever happened to Arrow? And Cascarino comes on as a sub. Tommy Coyne set it up on a plate for him, and he still done his best to miss it. You remember that? And he scores the goal with the underside of his boot. I think it hit the big studs at the back, and it goes in. And a few minutes later, he gets sent off for punching Craig Levein off the pus.
Which I fully back.
Was that not around about the
not
time?
just now, Craig Levein at that point. Yes, I fully back Cascarino.
But at that time, did Levein not hook Graham Hogg during a game against Wraith Rovers? and it was caught on some kind of grainy footage, and he ended up getting fined for it. You remember that?
It wasn't even a good punch day. It's not like the right hook Mick McCarthy gave Crawford Bapty. That's one of the best right hooks you'll ever see. I mean, he hit him and just walked up the tunnel.
That is up there. That is up there. See, back in the day, though, Kev, right, I remember in the Roy of the Rovers, there was a comic strip called Hot Shot Hamish and Mighty Mouse. I loved it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were two separate cartoons that were in a different magazine. I can't remember which one. I'm going to say Tiger or something like that. And then Roy of the Rovers brought them into the stable, and that was a comic strip. And they played for a Scottish football team called Princess Park or something like that, right?
It was,
but Crawford Bapty was a kind of name that they used for other players. You know, it was like a made-up name for Hot Shot Hamish's team. Hot Shot was his name, Hot Shot Hamish Balfour. And Crawford Bapty would not have looked out of place in his side.
And Mighty Mouse's name was Kevin.
Kevin Mighty Mouse. He wore glasses just like you, but he had a wee strap on them around his head. The artist was called Enzo Schiaffino. He was a brilliant artist. When I used to go to Snake Mountain, I like the Masters of the Universe reference here, Magnet 67.
Used correctly.
Well done. We used to get the broom loan in some of the other two stands. Now, I can't remember as far back as that. I wasn't going at that time.
You have a look at Charlie Nicholas's last game at Celtic, and we've got half the Govan. We've got half the Govan stand, the full broom loan, and I think we had the enclosure and half the main stand as well. And you've got to remember that when Celtic Park was all standing, I think they got between about 15 and 18,000 tickets for behind the goals. So,
and again, though, I think that the point of the discussion started off obviously with regards to where Celtic Football Club is in Scottish football, and that's at the very top, dominating the game. I mean, it wasn't too long ago we won 4 trebles in a row. We've already completed the game, Kev. We've spoken about that before, and now we're trying to find a way to ensure that we continue with that domination, but make progress in Europe.
I'm going to say, something that was brought up the other day when you were talking about another 9, which I think we're too far away from that yet, because hopefully would be away from Scottish football before that ever becomes a reality. For my opinion, I think that's where we're actually heading. I think the 4 trebles in a row is a bigger achievement in the 9 and shows you how good we were during that period. So all of them, it's shout about, you've got 9 titles, but we weren't there. Well, our 4 trebles were there when you were there competing. When you were in the same league, the 4 trebles are absolutely, as far for me, ends that argument round about that point.
No, it's something that, you know, I do think we'll get another 9. Whether or not we get another 4 trebles in a row, Kev, is something that I doubt very much, because like you say, you can always have a slip up. You can always have a bad day at the office or a really, really bad performance by the officials, and it doesn't happen for you in a cup game. So to actually go for 4 years without losing a cup game is something that I think is a one-off.
Aye, because you've got so many variables. You've got referees, you've got a slip, you've got a completely off day. And so to go, as you say, to go through four seasons and lose a cup tie is utterly is phenomenal. And son, a lot of folk are saying that you look at this season, and we've started off well in that this season, but you look at the run of games that we've got coming up, and there is going to be, everybody's going to start slipping up because of what we're asking our footballers to actually do. When we're currently doing like weekend, midweek, weekend. Once Aberdeen having to start doing that as well, that's going to be a test for them. It's going to be a test for us. So I'm looking forward to this. What was it Brendan called it? An ultra marathon. Bring it on. We've got to enjoy it. And what I'm not going to say is there is going to be wee bumps on the road in this ultra marathon, but hopefully by the time we get into springtime, we will be in a very, very good place.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, Pegleg Lonergan, don't get me wrong. Seriously, it's a minute's silence. Why act like the other mob? I think what I'm getting at here is in relation to how anything Celtic supporters do, be that the waving of a flag of Palestine or Lebanon, Kev, or singing through a minute's silence, that there's an argument to say it shouldn't even be at a football game. Let's be honest. I mean, there's some national 2-minute silence at some point during the week. It's only recently been introduced that poppies are worn on jerseys, etc., etc. But it's the reaction, Pegleg, if indeed that's your name, it's the reaction, Kev, against anything Celtic supporters do, think, believe or breathe, against everything else that the Celtic support and the Celtic Football Club has had to endure in 137 years. Now, we could be talking politics here in terms of the politics surrounding the formation of the football club. We could be talking about the flying of the Irish tricolour, and the 3 occasions, to my mind, where Celtic were up against it with the Scottish football authorities and flying it. And we'll dig into that. We could talk about the freedom of expression, what is and what isn't an offensive song. They introduced an offensive behaviour at the Football Act, Kev. Why? And I said this
fans, to target the Celtic support.
To target the Celtic support, Kev, and also to ensure that the presence of policing at Scottish football games continued during the absence of Rangers. Look at the timeline. Look at the timeline. The discussions around the offensive behaviour at the Football Act happened before Neil Lennon and Ali McCoist had some handbags during the apparent shame game. You'll remember that. It had nothing, zero, to do with that. They were looking at a way of ensuring that half of the budget that the Scottish police force would lose during the absence of Rangers, right, because at that point it would have been a complete absence of Rangers, which meant that the games that had to be policed, Category A football games, Kev, would no longer have to be policed. Now, these games are paid for. So that is part of an income that the Scottish police were making, and it was a political decision to ensure that policing continued at the football, even if there was going to be the absence of Rangers. So they introduced the offensive behaviour at the Football Act, the only bit of legislation in Scottish history to be revoked. Ask yourself why it was revoked when it was. Oh, aye, Rangers were back in the top league. So the whole thing around the offensive behaviour at the Football Act, it's a great way of highlighting how we as a Celtic support are treated, Kev.
I've seen guys' lives ruined with the Offensive Behaviour Act, with them being charged under the Offensive Behaviour Act and eventually being kicked out 3 years down the line after numerous court trips up to places like Inverness, Perth and Dundee, because it was the whole, did you find it offensive? And police lying, police not getting their story straight. I've seen guys lose jobs because of the Offensive Behaviour Act. It was one of the worst bits of legislation ever brought in by an SNP government. And that is kind of saying something. In my opinion. No,
but you're allowed your opinion, Kev. And the big thing as well, everybody's got an opinion on Celtic, so I'm pretty sure that we can have our own opinion and retort back as well, Kev. But with regards to that, they were ill prepared for the introduction of such a behaviour at the Football Act, to the point where they didn't know what was offensive and what wasn't.
What I will say,
you're saying there, every news outlet that I seen who spoke about the Celtic fans singing at the weekend said it was a pro-IRA song. They don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Well, what I would say, I don't know I was guarantee this. There's a lot of Celtic players that were involved in the 2 world wars that lost their lives as well. And what's the boy's name that writes the books? I can't remember. There
appears to be.
If I cut off. Or is it StreamYard?
I can still hear you. Nah, you're still here, mate. You're still here.
I'm still
keep
here.
Talking.
The Celtic during the war books, I can't remember the boy that writes the books, but if anybody wants to read them, they're really, really very, very good books about what the Celtic players that were lost during the First World War and the Second World War. So, and that's something that we've got to remember as well. Myself, I probably wouldn't have went in for the minute silence rather than disrupt it. But everybody's got the right to do what they see fit. And there has been some times when we've had minute silences for things. I remember the semi-final when the Hearts fans disrupted it for Pope John Paul. And I say right away, I do not understand why we're having a minute silence at a football game for this. And I remember saying that. everybody's got their own right to protest, and the Green Brigade and the boys and whoever else in that Celtic end thought that was the best way to do it. And I'm not going to argue with them. I'm really not going to argue with them. And I can't argue with folks saying it's been disrespectful to the Celtic players that died in the World War. I can't argue with that either.
Well,
it's not a black and white issue. It is not a black. There's a lot of grey areas in this. And
the big thing for me, Kev, is the fact that the Celtic support is dragged through the mud, and it's the first opportunity that anyone can get to do that, and that's the frustration for me. And I think that when you have been a support in relation to being oppressed for a number of generations or since the formation of the club, then
McCallum, that was the guy I was trying to that wrote the Celtic during the war. Ian,
there's a few of them back there. There's a few of them back there. And again, he appears on an early episode of the Celtic State of Mind so that we can get as balanced a view as possible on such a subject. Now, Scott Beaton is in, managed to tune in for live for a change, PGAD, and for some strange reason, my signal was getting a bit wonky there. Whenever that happens, Kevin's just going to chat away, chat into the void, Kev, speak into the abyss of Celtic international chat, and that's what you're going to do if I disappear. Derek Hayden came across Acsom very early into the pandemic and been on board since on a daily basis. Fantastic content. Keep up the good work. Derek, you are one at the moment of over 1,100 people watching this stream live, Kev. That still blows my mind when we get to that point where we're talking to fellow Celtic supporters from all over the globe in such numbers. It's astonishing, right? And we do other things as well. We get together and we do live events. We do the Friday night show. And tonight is the Friday night show. I've got my own routine, Kev. We record this during the week, be that on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You've not joined us yet, Kev. Hopefully you will at some point in the future. We were literally that away from having Bobby Gillespie on the show this week because he was in town. We were that away, but instead of coming to join us, he went away to speak to Declan McConville, Kev. And there's a picture to prove it as well.
We're always setting best to Declan, eh?
Declan, I honestly, I'd love to see his contact book. I'd love to peer into his contact book and see who I don't know, he goes for beers and he goes for coffees. He does all that kind of thing, Declan McConville. So we were very close to getting Bobby, but we didn't get Bobby. But we will. He has promised to appear on the show. But this week we've got Ken McCluskey, Kev, the Bluebells. What did the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the Bluebells? Come on, tell me, what is it?
Unfortunately for them, it's probably going to be Young at Heart. Unfortunately for them, that's what springs to mind. It really does spring to mind, and still game. They're a wee bit before my time. I must admit. So, Young at Heart. That's a song that's transcended time, ain't it? And a song that was originally written for Bananarama, if I'm correct.
Yeah, you are correct. There's a real history to the song, and I love the history of it because Robert Hogden, Bobby Bluebell, who hasn't yet appeared on a Celtic State of Mind, but he will. He was meant to appear one day. We were in the studio, Kev. Remember that? In the Gorbals.
We were interviewing Paul Kin in the Gorbals, and we didn't hear him at the door.
We didn't hear the bell. That's right. So he went out to the Brazen Heath for a pint, and then we lost him. We will get Bobby on the show. I'm going to ask you the question, though, right? Because you were saying, unfortunately. I mean, would it not be more unfortunate if you never had a hit?
Aye, look, sometimes artists will say it's something that's a milestone round their head, and others will embrace it, especially when they get to this point of their career. But hey, I would rather have a multiple number one hit that's remembered for generations and still being able to do what they can do. So maybe unfortunately it was the wrong choice of word there. Maybe it's unfortunate for me that I didn't know much about them, that I only remember Young at Heart. I would love to have that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Bill Drummond, in a book I'm reading now about Bill Drummond, he actually says that all pop stars should only have one hit then disappear. He says after that they just become boring and they parody themselves and they get involved in record company shenanigans. And if you have that one big hit, that should be you. Then you're packed off. You've done your job. And sometimes you go, that's maybe quite right. Maybe the one hit wonders have all got it right.
Well, there is that, I guess. Kev, I just think also in relation to art over the brand, once the record company comes in, and this is maybe less of an issue now because record companies aren't as powerful as they used to be. But when you go from a band to a brand, you start to write songs for that brand rather than what's true to yourself and all that stuff. But Ken McCluskey's on tonight. Tune in at 6 o'clock.
One of the things that Ken McCluskey has brung up is brung back the Willie Malloy experience, which was an utter bizarre thing in the late 80s, where that symbol appeared every so often, and you saw guys wearing fezzes at games. And
What's a fezzy? What's a fezzy?
A fez, one of the hats
with
the jewels in it.
A fedora?
No, a fez, like a Tunisian fez, like a wee. Right. It's like a bit of material with jewels in it. You sometimes see. I think Raiders of the Lost Ark in the marketplaces.
Mm-hmm.
You see,
and you saw them at Celtic game. I have never seen.
You saw them at Celtic games in the late 80s, and
Brilliant.
It was all today with the Willie Malloy CSC, which was and it appeared in the Melody Maker.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken McCluskey was part of them, and a couple of other Glasgow musicians, and they did re-release that on Spotify, and it's called the Willie Malloy Experience 125.
Yes.
And they've got a Henrik Larsson dub song, and they've got a reggae version of The Fields of Athen Rye.
Yep, it does exist. You're right.
It does exist.
I just loved hearing Dominic Behan talking about the formation of Celtic. I mean, I didn't think that existed, Kev, but it does exist, and it's on the Spotify version of the Willie Malloy Experience.
There you go. Peter Doyle, Tommy Cooper wore a fez.
Was that a fez?
That's a fez, aye.
Right, okay. Sorry, mate. I can never remember seeing them at Celtic Park, but there you go. You notice other things. You as a young kid did notice other things. You went to Capello and didn't watch the football. You were looking at the crowd and all that kind of stuff. That was the brain of a young Kevin Graham. But you're right. The big thing for me was Dominic Behan, because we got talking about the Patriot game. Obviously, they covered that on their debut album, Sisters. And it came to pass that Ken McCluskey was a family friend of Dominic Behan. Dominic Behan kicked about with Ken's dad, believe it or not. So Ken would wake up for school, and there would be this Irish guy lying hungover on his mum and dad's couch, kind of thing. That was the friendship that the father had with Dominic Behan. Later on, the McCluskey brothers wrote some songs with Dominic and appeared on the TV with him as well, and they got him to do this verse for the Willie Malloy Experience, Kev. So, I mean, we're talking about the stories and the songs. Ken McCluskey, tonight we talk about that as well, and the importance of the tifo by the Green Brigade recently of the Patriot game with the lyrics as well, and how it meant a lot to Ken having covered that song back in the day. But, at the height of your popularity, to cover the Patriot game I suggest would be controversial back then and today.
It would be, aye. It's changed days, eh? As you say, back then putting that out, it's how it's framed is completely differently from what it's framed now. It's very. You didn't get many people putting. When you have a look at some certain guys who are always filmed celebrating Celtic goals and Champions League nights, who'd never admitted to being a Celtic fan until whereabouts the early 90s, maybe.
When did it become? It's always been trendy. Let's be fair. I mean, Frankie Miller, for example, before he went to the dark side, Sean Connery, there was always that element, the Liz Taylor thing, where people gravitated towards Celtic. When did that start? Was it the 60s? Was it the European run? Or was it the Irish diaspora across the world that meant that people were aware of us?
I always say the change was probably 67 and winning the European Cup with a team of Scotsmen. Mm-hmm. I think that was a crossover point from people from an Irish diaspora side into folk that didn't have that starting supporting Celtic. I mean, you look at, a lot of folks still had been Celtic fans, and you've got to remember, Paul, when we were doing the music stuff, a lot of the bands wouldn't do it because their management going, no, you can't say that you support Celtic or Rangers because you're alienating 50% of your 50% of potential record sales. Look at Billy Connolly. Billy Connolly, when he released all the albums in the 70s and that, it's well known that he says he was a Partick Thistle fan.
Yeah.
He didn't say he was a Celtic fan because it was probably easier to do. So I always got a lot of time for guys that put their neck on the line and say they were Celtic fans in the 70s and the 80s because it was a completely different time. And you look at it, doesn't seem to bother anybody now.
No, it doesn't now. You're right. I mean, back
it doesn't
then,
bother anybody now.
Jim Kerr tells a story about taking Bono to a Celtic Rangers game. And it had to be all kind of like secretive and all that kind of stuff. But he tells that story, I'm sure it was in one of Richard Purden's books on Celtic that will be on my shelf behind me, where they had to do it kind of like in secret to get Bono into the ground and all the rest of it. You know, there was that secrecy around it. Feed the Bear asked the question, when are we bringing back Scream of Celica, Kev?
I don't know. Have we took it as far as we can?
I think it's one of the things that you could probably tie it in to having a guest on and having a This Is Acsom as well, Kev, because yeah, you and I could sit here and talk about a year in the world of Celtic and tie it into football, film or politics or whatever else. And it was popular, but it was really just the time element, wasn't it? It got to the point where you're a busy fella and it's difficult to get the diary as well. So here we go. There's loads of good comments coming through. The first one I'm going to bring in is Jungle Lion, who says that Henrik Larsson's biography has obviously been launched, the official biography. It's been done through the club. There's been a number of Henrik Larsson books released over the years. I can think off the top of my head of 3. There was a couple of DVDs and I think 2 or 3 videos as well. But this is the official one. And I don't know how in depth it's going to be, or if it's just going to be the goals galore kind of style book.
It's released today, eh?
It's released, aye. And on the back of that, he's going to be doing a big launch via the club. Interestingly enough, about 2 months before this was announced, we had approached Henrik for a live event, and we were going to do it at the exact same venue that Celtic have chosen. So that's unfortunate timing-wise that we were maybe just behind the planning of that. But we did ask him if he wanted to come onto This Is Acsom while he's over, and we'll see what he says. Jungle Lion, that would be some episode. Liam's skills was impressive for Ireland last night. I'm going to tap into some of the performances if you're keeping one eye or even both on the international stuff that's ongoing. And I'm going to start off with Arnie Engels, who was playing for Belgium last night in the Nations League. They were beaten 1-0 by Italy, Kev, and Engels got his first start for Belgium. So fair play to him. But I think what we've seen this season is it's not been plain sailing since he came to Celtic. He's coming for a wee bit of criticism. Overall, first few months in a Celtic jersey, what have you made of Arnie Engels, a record signing?
I must admit, I watched maybe about 50, 60 minutes of the Belgian game last night, and he put in an awful lot of work. And he didn't really do much on the ball, but then Belgium are a funny side. I couldn't really work out what they were trying to do when they were on the ball. What I've been really impressed with him, and I didn't expect from him, has been his work rate. His work rate at what, like bringing winning the ball back, no turning the ball over. His press, especially last night, he seemed to be the one of the Belgian midfield that was doing what I would call the Hatate press. Because Hatate always seems to be further forward. He was doing that for Belgium last night. And I think that's been a real surprise for me. A real surprise that the work rate, the fact that he's willing to roll his sleeves up and do a bit of the dirty work, but not in the same way that you would see a Scottish player rolling his sleeves up and doing the dirty work. There's a sort of, there is a Europeanness to him, a modern dayness to him. I've noticed that in the Champions League games as well, where he's got a number of assists in that as well, but it's his willingness to work as it really impressed me. I still think there's a lot more to come for him on the ball once he gets up to speed in the Scottish game. That must have been a complete culture shock to him last week. Playing on a pitch, it was like my receding hairline. So it must have been a right culture shock to him. I still thought he was a wee bit too far away from Callum McGregor at the time. But I'm going to look. We done the job last week and that as well. It's quite weird. When we were playing in Tynecastle a week on Saturday, and Matt O'Reilly made his debut at Tynecastle at the night game where Atati scored an absolute peach. And right away you could see Matt O'Reilly was a forward-thinking player. He had ability on the ball. You could see a pass. You could see he was a creative element. I'm still wondering what Engels' stamp is going to be on our side. But as I say, the real surprise that I have had with him has been his work rate and the willingness to do what we would call the unseen stuff. And he's maybe not been spectacular. He's done things quietly. I think he broke into the box far more earlier in his Celtic career. He hit the post and done stuff like that, and that's kind of sort of waned. I think it's adrenaline at that point as well. But if he keeps that work rate going and adds maybe a wee bit more creativity than what we've seen, then we've got a player. We've got a really... Last night, it's a higher level in the Scottish League, but his work rate, he didn't look out of place in that Belgian side.
No.
That's not to say they were great, but he wasn't any worse than anybody else on the pitch. And he basically got took off in 71 minutes because he was done. He was knackered.
Ran himself into the ground. No, it's good to see him getting that first start, Kev. And like yourself, I think we're going to see the progression of a player who Brendan Rodgers, well, for me, that's what he loves doing. He loves bringing in a young player, developing them.
I find it really. I mean, obviously, I didn't watch any of them in the Bundesliga, but I didn't expect him to play as far on the right hand side.
Yeah,
what he seems to be doing. That surprised me as well.
He's got a good link up with Kuhn Johnson. I think that's one of the biggest plus points for me, is the fact that there's a really good understanding down the right-hand side. It would be great if we could have something similar between, it will be Taylor, Maeda and Hatate down the left, because it seems to be right heavy a lot of the time. The other game, of course, that was already mentioned was Ireland versus Finland. It was 1-0. The prolific Evan Ferguson scoring the goal. That's Matt O'Reilly's teammate at Brighton and Hove Albion. He's a proper prospect at 20 years of age as well. He scores the goal for Ireland. What I found interesting as well is the fact that Scales performed so well. On the bench, Kev, Timo Pukki and also our very own Sinisalo. So he's lost his international place because he's not playing football, of course. And old Timo Pukki. There's a player there. It shows you that sometimes at a football club it just doesn't work. He's still playing international football.
Also, Evan Ferguson's goal was set up with a wee bit of Mikey Johnson magic.
Mikey Johnston magic, eh? How often did we see that in a Celtic jersey, Kev? Mikey Johnston magic. I was looking yesterday at a list of players. JP and I spoke about a list of players who had left Celtic, who were maybe like the golden boys coming through. And I think once we looked at this list of 13 players, Kev, we kind of got to the point where it was like, you know what, we're not really missing much. A lot of these young guys have gone on and not really done much. And the same can be said about a lot of the guys that leave Celtic. But there's a few players that are doing pretty well. I mean, at a different level entirely. Tumoka Iwata, getting a game every week, scoring a few goals, doing pretty well. Mikey Johnson. But again, it just comes back to that thing that it was never going to work at Celtic, Kev. You had to get them off the payroll. Had to get them out the door and moving on with their own careers.
Look, this is always going to happen, and there's going to be guys who... It's a hard shift playing for Celtic, and it was really interesting hearing Matt O'Reilly talk about it, and I've heard Joe Ledley talk about it as well. No, everybody can handle having to win every single week.
Yep.
The mental pressure that puts on you, and you have a look at the guys like Callum McGregor and James Forrest that have been there for 10, 12, 15 years doing that week in, week out. And that's testament to their mentality and their physicality as well, that they can, even when they get the defeats, they pick themselves up and keep on going and knowing full well. And there's some guys that's never just going to be for them. And these guys will go on and have great careers, will have careers elsewhere. And guys like Awata will be them. I look at other guys like Ross Wallace, had a decent career down in the lower leagues of England, like the Championship. Guys like that. There will be guys that move on from this Celtic team. Didn't get me wrong. I think if Palmer moves in January, he will have a career. He's got the talent to have that career. You look at Bernabe, back to an environment that suits him, and he's flying. Absolutely flying. Some moves just didn't work, and it just doesn't mean that these guys are bad football players. It just sometimes it doesn't work out for them. The young ones are a bit concerning, but when you look at the body of evidence that you and JP spoke about yesterday, the club were right. The club were right not giving them the contracts that they got elsewhere. So it's a shame for these lads. I mean, I think Ben Doak's going to be the exception. I do think Ben Doak could be the exception because he's doing well at Middlesbrough, but I don't know if Liverpool have went in a different direction when Klopp was there. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with Doak at Liverpool. So I think Doak could be the exception, but any of the rest of them that have left so far, you're like, I don't really think that we were right. I don't think we've made the wrong decision with any of them, and that's a shame for the boys because their career hasn't turned out the way that they thought it was going to do. And I actually do feel I do feel quite sorry for them, even though some of them majority of them are maybe set up for life already.
The big thing is, I know, and the big thing as well, Kev, it's not a new phenomenon that Celtic, bring a youngster through and they go elsewhere and they do the business elsewhere. And I mean, John Collins was at Celtic Boys Club, for example, Tom Boyd, Tosh McKinley. These guys all left the boys club, went elsewhere, made a career for himself, and then we had to buy them back. If you go further back, to when I was looking into the Quality Street gang, I think Celtic more or less got the best of them. But there was a crop of players there who were up at training on a Tuesday and Thursday who didn't get signed up or didn't break through. And I'm talking people like Kenny Aird, who went on to had a great career at St Johnstone and Hearts. He was at Celtic. Jimmy O'Rourke went on to become a Hibs legend. Believe it or not, and I've mentioned it on here before, Graham Souness was one of the guys that was going up and training with Celtic and training with Dalglish and McGrain and all these players. And they weren't signed up for Celtic. They went away and had a career elsewhere. It's always been the case, Kev. It's not something that's new. I just think the frustration these days is that back then we were producing so many players who did break through, and at the moment we're not.
Also, I think that is part of the frustration, but also it's more publicised nowadays because the academy gets covered. There's more blanket media coverage. I mean, in the 80s, if somebody was at Dundee United or something like that, you'd only ken they were released if their uncle tell your dad when he was having a pint in the pub. It wouldn't be like front. It wouldn't be all across websites or anything like that. So the clamour for the next big thing, we're always looking for new shiny things to come through, and that is. I mean, there's possibly an argument now, unless Tisdale comes in and Tisdale and OD completely revolutionise. That's not even a word, Kevin.
Revolutionise.
Aye.
That's another one for the Viz Dictionary, mate.
I'm doing well today. Come in and revamp. That's a better word. The academy setup. Is there an argument as why have we got it?
I was just going to say, how would you feel?
Why have we got it?
How would you feel, even though they could produce a white paper telling you this isn't working? How would you feel if they didn't have an academy, Kev?
It doesn't feel right at all.
No.
It does not feel right at all. I still say that we should be like the Harlem Globetrotters and take a side to play the top academies in England and in Europe. I don't think the Lowland League works. I really don't think the Lowland League works, and I don't think we've got a pathway. Hopefully that will change. Hopefully that will really change. But I think it's going to be too late. I think it's going to be really too late for the current crop that are sitting in the B team now.
Well, this is the unfortunate thing because
apart from Donovan, is it Harper and Turley? They've got something about them, but they really need to have a loan move within the next 12 months to go and play man's football.
The other thing I would say, I know you've went and seen some of the games, so you know the kind of standard that we're talking about. But the player I've been talking about in the last couple of weeks has been Daniel Cummings as well. Obviously, the goals have put him right at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and the fact that he doesn't have a new contract. So as of the 1st of January, he can talk to other clubs. So you think to yourself, on the one hand, we've lost all these kids and we keep doing it. The flip side of that is how many of them would get a game for Celtic right now at the age of 23. Liam Hughes went to Liverpool. No, he wouldn't. Conor McBride went to Blackburn. He's now 23. He wouldn't get a game either. Karamoko Dembele, 21, playing for QPR. Would he get a game for Celtic right now?
He'll have a career. Dembele will have a career, and he's proven it. He will have a career. So will Liam Morrison. Liam Morrison will have. I mean, he played a full season for Wigan, and he's got a bigger move to QPR.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not kind of worked well at QPR just now, but he will have a career.
What do you think of Barry Hepburn? Because he's now without a club, Kev, and he was one of these guys who obviously went to Bayern Munich, and it looked as though it was a case of, right, wow, what a move that is for a young kid. He's now 20 without a club. So it's a cautionary tale at times as well, isn't it? I mean, you've got to take the chance. Let's be honest. He would be regretting that for the rest of his life if he didn't. But it's not worked out, and he's now a free agent.
I'm hoping him and his family are looking at the experience that they had in Germany, because his mum and dad went with him, and Bayern gave them employment. So I'm hoping that they're looking back at that experience as a once in a lifetime experience, and I hope Barry finds a club soon and gets back on track. I really do. As I say, I feel sorry for these guys. There's a lot of shady businesses, men at youth football and that level of football, and there's a lot of these boys get badly advised. I'm not saying that Barry and Liam and all of that were badly advised, but there's even Celtic can maybe Celtic need to actually improve their pathway, and I can't see it. Hopefully it happens for the three that I've mentioned. But for the majority of the guys in that B team, it's already too late. Unless they're late developers. You can't write them off. But we just have to have a look at the last 10 years. And even like nobody's broke through. We had a league where we were the only team in it for a wee while, and we didn't bleed so many youngsters. Dylan McGeoch's jumped into my head there because he played. Lenny scored that great goal against St Mirren, and I put this in the group chat. Dylan McGeoch now plays for Carlisle United. He's in the latter stages of his career now. He's not a young player anymore, and his midfield partner in Carlisle is Wayne Biggins' son.
Wow. So we're going to go for a hat-trick here. So we've had Tony Cascarino and Wayne Biggins. Kev, what third player would complete that hat-trick of kind of early 90s nightmare players? Because those two were absolute dross.
They were, eh? What would be the third one? Would Gillespie get there?
Well, Gillespie was a great player. I think the problem with Gillespie was the fact that he was perennially injured. He just didn't play enough games. But yes, these things...
No, I'm not having Andy Payton. I'm not having Andy Payton. No.
His goal scoring record was excellent. See if you actually look at it.
No, I'm not having Andy Payton. No. Payton was decent for us. He was
just
at Celtic at the wrong time.
You know who else I'm not having, and it might come up, is Carol Muggleton.
Muggleton has came up, and again that's wrong as well.
Right. Okay. Here's my thinking behind
Muggleton. One of the guys that we got for the army.
All right, Justin Whittle, because at least Gary Holt had a career. He ended up getting capped for Scotland. Right, Justin Whittle. Yeah, we'll throw him in because just the nature of Lou Macari getting two squaddies in as trialists to play. Strange things happen, and Kev has made a brilliant point because back in the day, things weren't as scrutinised as they are now. You didn't know sometimes, Kev, what the Celtic score would be if we were playing a friendly game, and you would get a paper the next day, and you might get a tiny wee report, and it wouldn't even tell you the teams and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to bring up a player, and this is not because I thought he was an embarrassing player, because he wasn't. Anton Rogan. Why am I bringing this up? Well, look at the hair for a kickoff, and look at the jersey. Look at that jersey. That is an absolute. And Kev, can you remember who designed that jersey? Ex-guest of A Celtic State of Mind, Simon Weir. Now an actor. He's been on things like Trainspotting and Emmerdale and various other things on Scottish telly, and he's a friend of Acsom's. He designed that jersey. The reason I'm bringing this up, right? We only wore it once. We only wore that jersey on one occasion, Kevin, and it was in a pre-season tour of Switzerland in 1988. So we've won the double, Kev, right? And we take the team to Switzerland for pre-season, and we play a game, and that jersey is worn on the one and only occasion against a team over in Switzerland, right? Now, during that period, you might remember Pat Bonner had a terrible back injury. Can you remember that? And he had to go in for surgery, right? And his backup, if you remember the Scottish Cup final of 1988, was none other than former Distillery player Alan McKnight, who came to Celtic at the same time as Anton Rogan from Distillery. Well, Alan McKnight wasn't happy about being second choice, and he ended up going to West Ham for £250,000. So when we went over to Switzerland, we were left with one goalie, and that one goalie was Andy Murdoch. Now, Andy was at the Acsom event with Gordon Strachan and John Hartson last month. Andy Murdoch was one of the guests that came along. And lo and behold, Andy gets injured. So Celtic had to play 3 games in Switzerland using 3 trialist goalies. Now, I know there's a lot of absolute anoraks out there and a few cagoules, Kev, but can anybody tell me the 3 goalkeepers that played for Celtic in the 3 bounce games over in Switzerland?
I can name one.
Go for it.
Hamish McAlpine.
Correct. Hamish McAlpine played 1 game for Celtic in Switzerland as a trialist goalie. Now, if anybody can tell me any of the other 2, then you could effectively, go and mastermind with your specialist subject being Celtic, because quite frankly, nobody knows this. I don't even think it's on the wiki, unless they updated it after I told them, right? Any other suggestions, Kev? You want to throw any other in there?
There's a couple in the comments are bringing up Alan Rough, but I don't think Rough...
Ruffy didn't?
No,
Ruffy
Rough
didn't?
was...
No, he did not. He did not. There was a German goalkeeper called Marcus Knorr who came in for 1 game.
Oh, obviously, somebody's got that.
You're joking. Who is it?
No, there you go.
Who got it?
Jai Connolly, Jai Larkin, Marcus Knorr.
That is absolutely tremendous knowledge. We need to give you a prize for that, mate. Jai Connolly, Jai Larkin deserves a prize for that. That is like unknown Celtic trivia, right? Drop us an email, pauljahndykes@gmail.com, and we'll send you something out. That's unbelievable. There is a third one though, Kev, and I'm just looking to see who he played for. I'm typing that in as we speak, right? And his name was, you ready for this? Eric Burgener. Eric Burgener, Swiss footballer who played for a number of teams. I'm just going to bring them up just now. And he came in and played 1 game as a trialist for Celtic. He played for Servette FC. He played 168 games for them. And Lausanne Sport, 321 games. And he was a Swiss international with 64 caps. Who knew? Who knew? So you're right. Things would happen in the past, Kevin. They just weren't reported on. But if you are Jay Conley, Jay Larkin, you must have some memory. That's for sure. Well done, mate.
So Marcus Knorr and that Swiss goalie there have the distinction, like Chick Charnley and Christian Daly, of playing a game as a trialist for Celtic.
And Jason McAteer.
Yeah.
Jason McAteer played in that game that Christian Daly played in against Liverpool. Am I right? Is it Liverpool that we played?
Beat 6-0.
Yeah, I've got the videotape behind me here. So there you go. We digress. Sorry, it is International Week. It will happen. At least the Wi-Fi is working. Pegleg says Scales played well last night, or played last night, was solid. And
no
John
longer
Sweeney,
a surprise, is it? It's
no
longer a surprise, eh?
But it's good that he's getting the games, Kev, because he's not going to be getting 100% of the games, as he did virtually for a season and a half. So Liam Scales was on a run there, Kev, where he was playing 2 games a week for a long period of time. Now, you can't just take that away from him and I'm not playing competitive games. So it's great that he's getting international football, in my view.
It is. Again, the last time I was on, I said we're going to need to manage Cameron Carter-Vickers. So I think Scales is going to get games over the next couple of months. I do think he is going to get games. What I do think, though, is I do think Trusty is maybe above him in the pecking order now. And I think that was always maybe the succession plan. But he is going to get games. He is going to be needed. He is going to be a massive part of the squad over the next couple of months.
Well,
and I'm not saying that to belittle Scales. It's just with the evidence that we've seen, the fact that Trustees came in, and I know Brendan for the semi-final against Aberdeen gave his reasonings, but then that reasonings that that centre half's faster than other centre halves counts for playing any team, which is for me, which I think maybe puts him slightly ahead of Scales and Brendan's reckoning.
And I do think long term, and it's no disrespect to Liam Scales, I do think you're right. Long term, it was always meant to be Trusty and CCV. When you're spending £6 million on a centre half, John Sweeney, there would have to be 4 or 5 players having a bad day to lose their cup final, and including some dodgy refereeing. And your opponent would need to be at the absolute top of their game as well, John. That's the 3 elements I think that you would take into account.
But we've got to be prepared that it might happen. We haven't lost a meaningful game against them possibly since Postecoglou's first season, when we lost the first one, and even then is the first one even meaningful, because then they actually move on, and so you could probably go right back. When was the last meaningful one we actually lost? So what you're actually hoping that Rodgers was a bit stung that he wants that trophy back, and the players are a bit stung when that's your trophy, we just want that back. And you look at the way they dealt with Aberdeen after that, Rodgers was absolutely fuming in that game. I've never seen him that animated to get a result against a team, to prove, I'm going to prove the MSN, I'm going to prove the media wrong. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in the build up to that game.
It's like he takes it personally. I mean, when he booted that ball, Kev, that's partly what you're talking about. I mean, we're winning the game confidently and comfortably at that point, and he boots the ball and gets a booking, because, like you say, that all comes into the frustration of the 2-2 game, and he wasn't allowing it to happen, and it was all about the standards. I'm going to bring in quite a few of these comments before we wrap it up here. Gary Miller mentioned Shay Given. By the way, Gary, Shay Given was an unused substitute for Celtic in the New Year's game where they beat us 4-2, Kev, where fans started chucking stuff at the board. You'll remember. Mars bars and coins, which I think were collected and put in a tin. The DJ of choice, I'm sure you have spoken about this before. I probably have mentioned it, and I'm amazed that someone remembered or already knew that information. The Ruffy, Alan Ruff, yeah, he did sign very briefly for Celtic. 88-89 season, he made appearances, but that brings in the Orlando Lions friendly that was played on a Tuesday afternoon, when Celtic changed their own kits at half-time and wore a collection of different kits in the second half. Bizarre, Kev. Absolutely bizarre. So that we didn't have to change the centenary kits at full-time. Neely Mockin didn't let it happen. Peter Doyle points out that Rogan played in the FA Cup final for Sunderland. Liverpool, 2-0. Was it 2-0?
Soon as his only trophy with Liverpool, it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Estepona Boy says, Jay Conley knows his stuff. Have to admit, he says, I thought Nor was a Swiss one, but I'll still email for my prize. Yes, please do, and we'll get something out. We need to put a goodie bag together or something like that. Tosh Breenden's Home Junior Malone says, donate 10 grand every year for the Poppy Fund. That's what Celtic does. You're spot on. And on Tony Cascarino, Magnet 67 says his book is excellent. It is surprisingly good. Go and check it out. He admits that he wasn't eligible to play for Ireland, and he forged the documents. He ended up for a spell being their top scorer. Scott Beaton, you're back in. Now, you point out that the Bertiold charity are doing a pop-up stall in Barras Art and Design as part of our Christmas market on the 18th of December. get along if you possibly can. As always, Kev, we spoke about things left, right, and centre, and we went on a few tangents along the way. You got something else you want to throw in?
Two things. When going back to the start, when we started this podcast, and Anfield Rap was a massive influence on what we're actually doing. I'm actually doing a book launch with the guys for Anfield Rap tomorrow at the Record Factory on Byers Road. I'm going to be interviewing Neil Atkinson, who wrote this book about Jurgen Klopp. There's still some tickets left, so if you of Liverpool mind as well, I'm going to be interviewing Neil about this book. So that's it. Starts at 3:30. The doors open on tomorrow. So if you can get along and say hiya, and I'm going to see Kneecap on Sunday night. So if any of you are there, come up and say hiya as well.
Brilliant, Kev. Brilliant.
So,
no, it's superb. You're right to give them a shout out, the Anfield Rap, because not only were they hugely inspirational, they've been very helpful along the line as well, with guidance and all that kind of stuff. They've always supported us. So it's great to see that you're collaborating with them tomorrow. And I hope it all goes well, mate. The Marquee Player Network, he wasn't one of the goalies, mate. He wasn't one of the goalies. Right. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. If you want to come along and see us live, there's a couple of gigs coming up. One with John Collins and one with the Centenary Boys, Roy Aitken, Peter Grant, Pat Bonner. All the ticket information's underneath this video. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and join us again on Monday for a Celtic State of Mind.
Thanks.